Thank you. I'm Nancy Hay. I'm Lloyd's Register Foundation Director of Evidence and Insight as of this month. So I'm also going to be talking about my experience for the last 10 years running the What Works Centre for Wellbeing, a collaborating centre trying to work out what individuals, governments, businesses, charities and scholars can do to improve wellbeing across the whole of the UK, but also beyond. And I'm drawing also on 15 years experience trying to get evidence into decision-making effectively in the civil service across multiple different departments. So I really liked the keynote earlier where we talked about evidence-informed decision-making. Decisions will get made. If the evidence is there, they will hopefully be much better. And more importantly, that evidence is just learning. So I think we talked about action learning in that thing and how we can get that system to learn effectively with the highest quality feedback, which is the evidence we're creating, as possible. And often, though, this is slow policy making. So we've talked a lot about some of these very fast decision-making processes, but often what we're doing is anticipating. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about, well, in fact, I'm going to be talking about community and how shared interest creates that community and teamwork. And shared interest comes from curiosity. So I'm going to be talking about community and curiosity today. So I'm going to talk about some lessons that we learned after 10 years of collaboration. We've literally just done that inquiry to work out what worked and what didn't. And I'm going to talk about the World Risk Poll Resilience Index because I want to bring some of these ideas into your context and actually learn at this bigger level to draw out some of these ideas that I hope will be of interest. So this is the What Works Centre for Wellbeing. We're a collaborating centre. Some of you will know the WHO collaborating centres. It's a similar-ish one to that. We had over 110 different partnerships and 90 different collaborative projects. The point was to collaborate. So I learned a lot, have a lot of scars and things. It was cross-sector, so hopefully some of the ideas that we've been talking about today will come through about working with government, working with business, working with civil society really broadly, both community groups that we heard earlier, but also civic society organisations in all of things. And it was multidisciplinary. So that was quite exciting as well. Often you're solving problems as well. So if you want the learning in there, our legacy report brings that together in an appreciative way. So some of the things I learned that I want you to take away today is simply that collaboration is teamwork. Teamwork is built through relationship, and that's built through trust. And trust comes from having shared moments of positive social connection, so feeling good about yourself with the other person. It could just be sending silly cat videos, but it could also be sharing things of shared interest. Mutual respect. So this is respecting the experience of practitioners, of those in other sectors where we talked about the red lines that people have, the things that were important to them, and freedom of expression, so making sure that voice of everybody is heard. So that's how you get a learning relationship. 6 things that really matter, and languages is so important, I haven't even given it a number. Language is about making people speak different things. So partly, sometimes it literally is a different language. But sometimes it's also that people speak public health, or they speak defence, or they speak, media. So there's different languages literally going on. So the simpler we can get our communication, the better. And this actually came out of the Chilcot inquiry, where we had different languages being spoken, different frames of reference being spoken by 3 key departments, Foreign Office at the time, DFID at the time, and Defence. But actually that applies across the area. So very often you don't even realise you're speaking in acronyms until you speak to somebody else who goes like, what? Sorry. That means something completely different in my context. And so that language point is also about how we think about things and framing. And we were really lucky with one of our collaborations. We had like these massive 4 big evidence programs, 4 different collaborations. But one of the things that was really cool, we were able to bring our psychology community implementation research colleagues together with our business school colleagues on Workplace, because some of their people had trained in the same way. So they thought about problems in the same way, and they had a language to communicate across the piece. And that helped us understand how to apply the evidence in community setting, in a place, and in a workplace that made sense. And suddenly it released a massive breakthrough and allowed us to use a lot more evidence across different disciplines. So that was just how people saw the problem. And so sometimes those where people have trained can be quite exciting. People's priorities and success criteria vary, sometimes completely incompatibly. And sometimes you wonder why a partnership is not working, and then you realise that their goal actually is to become an MP, and they don't really want to collaborate with you. Or their goal is to become global expert X on this, and they want a TV show, and actually they're not going to do that with you. Or they'll be, I mean, I've picked some really silly ones, but they're often can be completely incompatible in that actually they want to build in their department a whole thing that actually is not, they're not going to share. So sometimes that success criteria can vary as well. Again, you just want to get the information out quickly to as many people as possible, and they want to get in the most prestigious journal possible, and it takes 6 years. So how can we get a compromise between those two? There are bridging institutions, people and products that matter. So you don't always need to be absolutely on top of each other to collaborate. So some people are super key. And we discovered that we had a collaboration where the lead person who put this astonishing collaboration together with 17 different organisations, from civil society to research in loads of different places, and they left the country because he didn't like the Brexit outcome. And we were like, oh my God. And the whole thing collapsed. And we were like, oh geez. So we rescued bits of it, but some people are absolutely key, also because they have a vision. Some institutions are key, often professions or professional bodies, which is why I was excited to come here today, because you've got a shared interest as well. But sometimes those institutions are organisations whose bridging roles. So that's what the Evidence Centre was, the What Works centres were that. And sometimes there are bridging products. So evidence synthesis is a bridging product, but so things like areas of research interest that government provide as well. So you don't always need to be next to and on top of it to be able, or even know that you're part of a collaboration to collaborate on solving a problem. I always ask, how can I help? Which is always an interesting one. But on the help here, so teamwork comes from helping each other and supporting each other. And sometimes that doesn't happen, but the how can I help question is interesting. But in policy making terms, that's often about anticipating the question that people are going to ask. So I often got asked, okay, what works for children and young people's well-being? And I'd be like, oh goodness, that's like a massive question. Or what works to tackle loneliness? And like we could answer it at one point and say, well, I'm sorry, nothing works. But we knew that in 5 years' time, they're going to come back to this strategy again, and we needed to be able to answer that question. So this is the slow policy making that evidence does. And yes, it was a different official in 5 years' time, but they were asking the same question. So we had to be able to do a different report, a different strategy, and we did that because we systematically built the learning in a slow, positive way. And actually the department were flipping brilliant at building that and supporting that evidence bit. There's a flip of that I'll come to at the bottom. Time and effort to collaborate. Who needs to actually be in that room? Why are you here? Sometimes it feels really nice to talk about things with people who get your stuff, but that doesn't always solve the problem. Often people want you to be in their gang, and you'll go across to talk to health colleagues, and they'll say, or in Wales, health colleagues, and then they'll say, oh, you must meet so-and-so, and you must meet so-and-so. And I'm like, but my job is to go and talk to them over there. And so it may feel nice to talk to people who care about your thing, but actually you may not be solving that problem if you're always in that room. And sometimes collaboration fails because you're just talking to people who feel the same. And it takes time and effort. And that time and effort is sometimes resource dependent. And I'll come back to that right at the end. Sometimes it's just doing something together, and sometimes that is informal. Sometimes it's contractual, sometimes it's a partnership, sometimes it's a grant, but sometimes you're literally just sitting next to each other. So with the Children's Society, we just happened to sit next to their research team for 4 years. We never did anything with them directly until quite close to the end, but we worked together so well, just asking questions across that desk. Sometimes co-location can work. And similarly, we had an evidence quarter collaboration as well. Two things that I would say were the sticky bits. One is visibility versus generosity. So sometimes when you're helping others and collaborating with others, their brand gets on the product and not yours. And sometimes that's exactly what you need in order to make the change happen in the place that you want it to happen in. It gives agency and autonomy, but you're not very visible for that generosity. And that can be a real tension. And some people want to build profile and all that sort of stuff and don't want to share. So that's quite interesting. Sometimes when you go and ask people what research that they need, they'll say, essentially, they want a faster horse because they can't work out how to explain this. And this was particularly important with business. They kept saying to us, we want to answer this question, But we were like, but that's not a research question. Or you went to say, what research do you need? We want to do some research for you. And they couldn't answer that question. So we did quite a lot of mediating to work out what the research questions were. And it took like 5 years to work out what they needed and how we could research it to get there. And sometimes they don't know what the answer is until you provide it, and then they go, oh yes, that's exactly what I needed. So sometimes that innovation is quite key. So those are my tricky bits. I'm going to put it into some particular examples and some really big collaborations. So one of the things I love about well-being is this idea that anyone can contribute to progress and anyone can contribute to the learning, and that this data that we all need to make better decisions can come from anywhere. And the other thing I love about wellbeing data is that it's often systematically and robustly collecting lived experience data from people and helping them participate and their experience participate in this process. And I love the World Risk Poll. This is one of the reasons I joined the foundation, because it gives a voice where it helps fill a data gap that we didn't have before. It's a voice to those where data isn't necessarily collected. It's about experience and perception of risk, but also that provision of that data publicly and availably as a public good enables lots of people to use that to make change happen, whether we know who they are or not, or whether we care specifically about the particular thing, or from our interests, what's happening. So I think this is a really good example of a specific collaboration, obviously, with Gallup, that we worked and we progressed, and the relationship built and shifted over time as we learned what we were both interested in, what could both bring, but also this bigger understanding of how we could use evidence collaboratively and build. I think we used action learning, but I talk about building a learning system. So how can we all use that evidence, whatever our roles, whatever our capacity in our community or in our public life or in our organisations, to make change happen and contribute back to that learning? How do you make it as easy as possible? I love the citizen science example earlier. So this is a little example of the type of data. I'm showing you this basically because I want to see if you can do it, if you go and do it yourself as well. But this is the sort of thing we can start to pull out, and I'll pull out today from this resilience index. There's a bunch of questions about individual resilience, which you'll hear the word agency, which is another word for autonomy, which we talk about planning and preparedness. There's household resilience. There's community resilience, which I'm going to come back to because that's what is where teamwork is, but societal resilience as well, which is where the policy-making decisions happen too. And some of these questions were a collaboration as well, so some of you have been involved in them, I think, as well. So collaborating to work out what questions we want to ask, helping develop different question sets to dig deeper into different things. And this is exciting, helping bring in other places and collaborations, and that data is a really clever way and there's lots of different ways you can collaborate around that. Sorts of things it tells us. So I'm going to give you like 2-minute run through of what it tells us. This is fast, and it's fast deliberately because you'll be interested in different bits. And the idea is to stimulate questions, hypothesis, things that you can delve into. One is we can see that there's some outliers. Yes, income matters to resilience, but there are some outliers in this, both ends of that. So what is that starting to tell us? We can see that on average, 20 countries decreased their resilience and 8 increased significantly. There's a little bit in the middle where they did nothing, which I'll come back to in a minute because the UK is in there, right smack in the middle. We need to look under that bonnet. You can see the societal dimension, the headline bits about it as well. You can see the community dimension, which is how communities look after each other, and you can see different places within that about how they're doing, different changes in that. The household dimension, so that family bit and how they come and go as well, so you can start to dig into that, and then the individual as well, so we can do that. But 30% of people experienced a disaster-related natural hazard between 2021 and 2023. And this we started to dig into that in terms of that individual resilience and household resilience. So people who could feel that they could protect themselves, this feeling of agency and autonomy, and this feelings of the questions about how you plan for future disaster starts to pull out some really interesting things about, okay, how does this planning for future disaster, does it matter that you feel you've got agency or not? These are great questions that we can start to understand. But one of the ones I loved here about community, which is teamwork, is this example of Morocco, where we can start to see this the responsiveness of this index, where you would expect, given what's happened in Morocco, for resilience to have dropped. But what we saw, interestingly, is individual resilience dropped, but community resilience stayed relatively high. And what we're seeing there is what's going on with that community bit. And that community bit is teamwork. And we also saw that in places like Hull during the pandemic, where what happened there was the community response had been built over time through a partnership we were doing with Spirit of 2012 Trust, bringing the learning from the Olympics around volunteering, putting that into the City of Culture, something completely different. And when the pandemic hit in Hull, which previously had very, very low levels of community wellbeing, people knew what to do. They had a volunteer people, they knew where to go, they knew how to respond, and their wellbeing as a community stayed much higher because they had that response. So there's things that we know that we can do from these collaborations. I'm going to bring this teamwork one up here. This is, for those of you who watch the football, this is the outcome of Group C, which I think was the final outcome. You'll notice that teamwork improves performance. But UK was one of only 2 countries where resilience changed very little between those last 2 years. So I'm like, what's going on there? Why is that? What's happening? So it'll be really interesting to know that. But some of the things that did change about what people worry about and experience about in the UK about risks and harm was different to other places. And it'd be really interesting to understand what those were. And they did change over the last 2 years too. And then this UK warnings and preparedness by income. And one of the things about that household resilience that shifted was the amount of money people had to, if they could cover their basic needs if income lost. So that financial resilience had dropped. And you could also see from that financial ability to cope, essentially, was also about whether they received a warning about disasters as well. So there's some interesting things about that. And when you've not got enough money, it is really hard to collaborate because you cannot do timings. So this is some things coming up, but more specifically, we have a call for collaboration with the World Orbis Poll into action here. So if there's anything in here that's prompted some questions, we'd love to collaborate. Thank you.